I did all the things wrong. I did all the things that you're not supposed to do. I quit a job impulsively, out of emotion, without a plan, without savings, without a job lined up. Today, I want to share with you a story about manifestation that has happened in my own life. And the reason that I want to share this story is because there are a lot of lessons that I learned from this experience that have taught me a lot about how manifestation works. And it's quite different than I think the image that you get when you start looking into like law of attraction and things like that. So I really want to share this story because I just really want to talk about how you can sometimes manifest things in ways that are completely unexpected. This is the story all about how my life got flipped, turned upside down. This is the story about how I went from a job that was giving me so much stress and anxiety and made me feel really trapped and stuck and miserable with my life. And now I'm basically living my dream life. I mean, saying living my dream life sounds so, I don't know, it sounds kind of dramatic. I live in an apartment that I absolutely love, and also we live in Montreal, which I have always wanted to live in Montreal. It's one of my favorite cities. I work for myself, which allows me to be super flexible in my routine and allows me just so much freedom to basically do whatever the hell I want. And it's not always dreamy and amazing, but like life is not always dreamy and amazing. I personally believe that life is always going to be 50-50, but this is definitely a life that I love that not even that long ago, 2 years ago, I never would have imagined that I would be in this position. That is the manifestation story that I want to talk about in this video. And it's a manifestation story because the way that I conceptualize manifestation, it's basically just the process of turning something from your imagination to reality. And I feel like when you say it like that, it doesn't have to be this like spiritual thing. It can be. If you feel aligned to like the spiritual side of manifestation, that is beautiful and amazing, and I love that. But also, I really think it's just as simple as creating something that you only imagined and bringing it into the real world, whether that's, your dream apartment, your dream partner, your dream job, whatever it is. The process of going from imagination to reality is what I consider to be manifestation. So before I really dive into my story, I just want to get one thing super straight. I think I might mention the fact that I quit my job impulsively with no plan, no savings, and started a business, and now I'm living my dream life. That's kind of the summary of the story. And I want to be clear that I am not telling you to quit your job. I think that that's a decision that you have to make for yourself. And I also want to be clear that this is not a how-to video. This is just me sharing my story. And the reason that I want to share this story is because I believe that it's a really beautiful manifestation story that really illustrates how manifestation works in the real world and how it sometimes looks a lot messier than you think it's going to look. You're not always going to know how exactly it's going to happen. And I also want to share my story just as an example of the fact that you can find success as a business owner without doing the traditional like slow transition, working a day job for X amount of years and saving up very, very slowly and only taking the leap when you've matched your income. And that is a very traditional story that I think feels very safe to a lot of people. And honestly, there's nothing wrong with that story. Well, actually, there's a few things wrong with that story, but I talk about that more in another video, which maybe I'll link it there. This is just gonna be me sharing a story about how it can work out even when you do things that seem illogical and unsafe and risky. But when you trust your intuition to guide you, things can work out in really beautiful ways. Okay, so let's start by rewinding back a couple of years ago. My partner and I, we briefly discussed the idea of moving to Montreal. And it was something that we both felt aligned to. We had visited Montreal a couple of times. It was something that we both felt, really excited about. But there were a lot of barriers to moving to Montreal. Even though both of my parents are immigrants, and you'd think that that would make me a little bit more open to the idea of completely completely uprooting my life and moving somewhere else. I find that idea so daunting. I found it so scary. I had lived in Toronto almost my whole life, so the idea of uprooting my life and moving somewhere else was kind of foreign to me. And then on top of that, if you're not familiar with Canadian provinces, Montreal is in Quebec, which Quebec is the French-speaking province in Canada. Generally speaking, all of the other provinces you can get by with English perfectly fine as your only language, and that's great. But Quebec is the one province that is French first, which means that if you want to work here, you have to be bilingual. I mean, there's lots of exceptions to that rule, of course, but generally speaking, at that time when we were talking about one day moving to Montreal, I was working in retail. So to me, it really did feel like a far off fantasy, the idea of moving to Montreal, because I am not fluent enough in French to be able to work a retail job here. Those are some of the barriers and some of the reasons why this idea of moving to Montreal seemed like kind of a distant idea, a very like far off fantasy. But at the same time, when we had talked about this idea of moving to Montreal, there was this feeling of inevitability. There was this feeling that like, yes, one day we probably will move to Montreal. I feel like that is very important, and that is part of why I consider this a manifestation story. We had this vibe, this energy of, yes, this is going to happen. It is inevitable. We didn't know when and we didn't know how, but it definitely felt like something that we both kind of agreed was something that we would do one day. Sometimes when you're manifesting something, it can feel so urgent and it can feel like you're really working so hard towards this goal. But I think a lot of the magic of manifestation comes when you release that intensity, that desperation, when you release needing to know how and needing to make it happen, and you shift into allowing it to happen. I think that's where the magic comes in, and that's what allows the universe to create the path of least resistance that brings that desire to you. And this is where it gets a little bit more spiritual and a little bit more difficult for sometimes people to grasp. You don't have to make things happen. Yes, there is aligned action, and yes, you have to look for opportunities and you have to actually take action when those opportunities present themselves, but you don't have to go at it with this like energy of this needs to happen by a specific date and we need to figure out how we're going to do this. We need to have a plan. It comes from this place of wanting to control the universe, basically. And I think that's a very natural desire. But in my experience and with this story, a manifestation works best when you just allow the universe to create that path of least resistance that brings your desires to you. It might take longer than you think that you want it to take, but I find that when you allow it to happen naturally and you allow the opportunities to arise without forcing and pushing and desperation, it unfolds in a way that you never would have been able to control. You never would have been able to predict. If you're trying to manifest something, it can be very beneficial to release the trying energy and kind of shift it into inevitable. Shift it into something that you know is going to happen, and you don't need to know how and you don't need to know when exactly, but you are allowing the situation to come into reality when it's supposed to. So moving on with this story, not too long after we set that intention that, one day inevitably we would live in Montreal, I actually landed what I thought was going to be my dream job. I was so excited about this job, but if you know me now, you know that I work for myself now. I'm an entrepreneur. So clearly that was not actually my dream job. I started that job literally 1 month before COVID and the pandemic really started. So everything was looking up, everything was, looking very bright in my future. And then 1 month, literally 1 month into my job, as I was still getting to know the team, still onboarding and training. Actually, I don't even think it was a whole month. I feel like it was like 3 weeks into that job, we did our first lockdown in Toronto. And, that's where everything kind of went downhill. And I think part of that was just because of, the pandemic, and part of that was unavoidable. No one was prepared for all of the things that would change with the pandemic. But that is kind of what shifted this job into something that was a source of extreme stress for me. And looking back on it now, I'm honestly so amazed with how much I put up with and how much I went through. And I had basically started living this lifestyle where I was just constantly in a state of stress, just 24/7. I wasn't sleeping well, I wasn't eating well, I felt like I was working all the time. I just felt like I was constantly in this state of stress, and it was slowly building and building and building. And eventually I got to a point where I started looking for new jobs. The pandemic had been going on for long enough that I was like, okay, I don't think I can look for another retail job. I need to figure out what the heck else I can do with my career. And this is the first big shift that I had in my mindset, because I was an art school dropout, as I've mentioned. I didn't think that I had a lot of options. And I feel like this is actually an important element of manifestation. One of the first things that I had to do in my situation is I had to open myself to the possibility of looking outside of what I thought was possible, looking outside of the scope of the reality that I was currently living in, which was that I was a retail manager. All of my experience was in retail management. I didn't have a lot of experience in the design industry, and I had dropped out of art school, and I hadn't actually been a design student. So if you follow me for my design studio, and if you're familiar with my work as a designer, you might be surprised to know that I did not go to school for design. I went to art school, okay? I went to school for art, and those are very different things. I did not learn graphic design in school at all. I didn't have any of that experience. I'm entirely self-taught, and it's really only been a little over a year. But my point is, my scope of what was possible was so limited, and one of the first steps in creating a manifestation is to expand your idea of what is possible. And that is one of the first things that I had to do. I had to expand beyond, I am a retail manager and I can only get another retail job. I had to open my mind to the possibility that maybe I could get a design job even though I have very little design experience. I didn't have a portfolio. I didn't go to school for design. I didn't really know much about the design industry, but I knew that I had kind of a natural knack for design, and I knew that my art experience could kind of translate into the design world in a way. So once the stress of my job in retail had started building and building, I started looking for design jobs. And I really thought that that was what I was going to be manifesting, was a job. I thought that I would find a job working as a junior graphic designer, and I would, work my way up, learn the skills, and then eventually I'd be able to move up to, creative director position or whatever. Basically, my point is, I had a specific vision and I was like, okay, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm manifesting. This is the how. And I really want to emphasize that point is I was really trying to tell the universe, like, this is exactly how everything is going to unfold, which is so funny looking back on it now. I was so far off base. I had been looking for jobs and I even got to a point where I did an interview that I was like, this is it. This is the job. It is perfect. It's the dream job. It's exactly what I've been looking for. But I didn't get that job. And it was devastating. And I know that CEO of that company really liked me. We really connected, and I really felt so certain that I was gonna get that job. And I had this desperation that I was trying to hold down because I knew that I didn't want to have a desperate energy, but I really, really, really wanted that job. And the fact that it didn't work out the way that I wanted it to was so painful to me. I didn't know, I felt completely lost. I felt like if I can't get that job where the CEO loved me and we really vibed and connected and I felt so optimistic, if I can't get that job, then what the hell am I gonna do? That was it. That was the job. It's so funny how sometimes we get so attached to the specifics. When we're trying to manifest something, sometimes if you're trying to manifest a partner, you're like, this is the guy. It's gotta be this guy. This is him. He's my future husband. And that's not how it works. Maybe it works like that for some people. And I think that there is, a degree of specificity when you're manifesting. But I was so attached to that specific opportunity. When I didn't get that job that I felt so attached to and so certain about, it threw me into this kind of spiral of hopelessness. And that was the emotional state that I was in when there was a big shift in my job. I got a new manager because my manager for the whole time that I had worked there went on maternity leave. But this new manager was not it, guys. She was not, it was not good. It was not a good experience. The very, very short experience we had working together, it was honestly maybe a week, was so traumatizing for me. Just that 1 week of working with this manager, and that was it. I'm not usually this impulsive. I am quite an impulsive person, but I did not plan to quit my job. Okay, you guys, I was looking for graphic design jobs. As I mentioned, I had been looking for months. I was planning to leave my job when I found another one. That is the safe thing. That's what you're supposed to do. But I was in a meeting with this new manager one day, and that was it. I was done. After one particular meeting that did not go very well, I basically had a panic attack, and I called our human resources director, invited her to a Zoom call, and I was crying and having an anxiety attack, and I was basically like, I am done. This is it. I cannot work with this woman, with this new manager. I need to leave. And I didn't have a plan. I didn't have another job lined up. I mean, now, like, if you know me now, I work for myself. I have a really great business that I run that I'm in love with and obsessed with. But that was not on my radar, okay? I was not planning to start a business. It was not on my radar. I was looking for jobs, and I didn't have one lined up. I had no plan. I had no savings. I did all the things wrong. I did all the things that you're not supposed to do. I quit a job impulsively, out of emotion, without a plan, without savings, without a job lined up. And even though I knew in my heart that I'm so talented and I have so much value to offer, I had no proof. You know, I had only ever worked in retail. I had dropped out of art school. It felt like I didn't have a lot of opportunity. I didn't have a lot of options, is how it felt. I know now that that wasn't true, but that is how I felt in that moment. And the way that, you know, traditionally that you prove that you're capable of doing something is if you've done it in the past. And now I've shifted my life and my beliefs so much that I personally don't look at the past as an indication of what's possible for the future anymore. So here's where the story gets more magical and coincidental. And here's where it really starts to feel like a manifestation story, because everything after that happened so quickly. I quit my job, and then I can't remember if it was literally that evening or like the next day, but like honestly, not very long after, we get an email from our landlord at the time saying that because of COVID and the hard times that he was facing as an actor who, you know, couldn't really work a lot during the pandemic, he had to sell his condo that we were renting out. And that meant that we had to leave. And I'm telling you, this was like literally like, if not that same day that I quit, it was the next day. It was like immediately. I was out of a job and we were out of an apartment. But what was cool was our landlord, he recognized that he was kind of putting us in a shitty situation. He gave us very short notice, and he was like, if you are able to find a new place in this certain amount of time, I think it was like 2 weeks, I will pay your first month's rent. And we were like, hell yeah, let's take advantage of this opportunity to get our deposit back and also first month's rent. So that's a couple $1,000 to basically start off somewhere else. So at first, when we got that news, we were looking in the same building that we were already living in. We were like, this could be a really easy move. We could just move upstairs or downstairs, or it doesn't have to be a whole big thing. Let's look for apartments in this building. And then we started looking for apartments in our area. And then might have been a day or two later, we were like, why don't we just move to Montreal? My partner had been working from home for about a year at that point. So he was very comfortable with working from home. His job was very comfortable with him working from home. He didn't need to be in Toronto, really. The fact that I had quit my job suddenly became an opportunity because I was no longer tied to working a retail job, which, if you remember from the beginning of the story, that was one of the barriers to moving to Montreal, was that if I was working retail, I didn't speak the language well enough. That barrier was essentially eliminated. I kept trying to figure out how to make things happen. And the way that they actually unfolded is not something that I ever would have been able to do. That's the magic of the universe. The point that I want to illustrate is like, these are all awful, terrible situations. I quit my job because of the insane amount of stress that I was going through. And we got kicked out of our apartment from our landlord who wanted to sell the condo. Like, these are not situations that you would ever want to manifest. These are not situations that you would typically, think are opportunities. I think that's the magic sometimes of how your story might unfold. It might come through something painful. And I've learned now to appreciate that pain and that journey. And I'm not trying to say that all manifestations have to come from obstacles and pain and struggle, but I do think that sometimes that is part of the story. It can turn out so much more amazing than you ever thought was possible, which is my current situation. If we had never set the intention of moving to Montreal, and if I had never years and years and years ago set the intention that I really wanted the freedom and flexibility of setting my own hours and, basically working for myself, then I don't think that I necessarily would have seen those awful situations as opportunities. I wouldn't have seen that me quitting my retail job impulsively out of stress was actually an opportunity for me to completely shift my career path. Maybe we wouldn't have seen that our landlord giving us 2 weeks notice to basically move out was actually an opportunity for us to finally move to the city that we had both said we wanted to move to. And it all happened so quickly. Once it started happening, everything was so quick. Because of the pandemic, people who were listing apartments were much more flexible to doing virtual tours. So that was an opportunity that we never would have been able to create ourselves. Before the pandemic, we thought if we ever wanted to move to Montreal, that it would have to be a big deal. We'd have to come here, stay in an Airbnb. Okay, so my memory card actually just got completely full, which is really funny because I've been talking about this story for quite a long time, actually. I'm gonna have a lot of fun editing this video. I think I've been talking for an hour now, and I don't think I want it to be an hour-long video, so that's gonna be fun to edit. So I think that I was talking about how everything kind of started to unfold. Everything lined up so amazingly after that. We found our dream apartment. I love our apartment so much, and the rent is cheaper than what we were paying for a 1-bedroom in Toronto. We now have a 3-bedroom in Montreal. We were living in a condo before, which I thought was something that I would really love, which again is another story about when you try to control the specifics so much, it doesn't always turn out the way that you think that it will, and you don't always like it as much as you think you will. Whereas when you allow the universe to just work its magic, life can kind of unfold for you so beautifully. And we were able to get everything sorted out faster than we've ever, if you've ever looked for an apartment, you know that it can be a very long process. It can take months. We did it all in 2 weeks. 2 weeks after I quit my job, we were moving to Montreal, and I still had no plan, but there was this sense of hope and opportunity and the world just opening up, and I started a business. I had years and years ago set the intention that I would love to work for myself. I'd love to be my own boss, but that was not something that I was actively working towards. And then I threw myself into the deep end, basically threw myself into a situation where it's well, this is what you're doing now. And it worked out. I mean, I'm not going to go through my entire first year of business. There were ups and downs, as starting a business is always going to have ups and downs, but I learned so much about myself in just the past year and a half. My life is completely different than it looked like, a year or two ago. I never would have predicted that things would end up this way. I think that's the biggest takeaway from this video, from my personal manifestation experience. Your job as the manifester is to set the intention and create the image in your mind, create the vision for what it is that you want and how it is that you want to feel, but release control of how exactly you want to get there. Because honestly, you've seen in this story, sometimes things are gonna come about in the most random and crazy ways. What happens when you set that intention and you hold that energy of it being inevitable is that when these opportunities come up, you're able to see them. And sometimes, like it was in my story, it might come out of a stressful situation that you would never want to manifest. You would never want to manifest a really stressful, shitty job, or, your landlord kicking you out with 2 weeks notice. That for me ended up being exactly what I needed. And the other thing that I really wanted to highlight, which is this idea of this or something better. And I feel like when you relinquish control of the how and trying to map it all out perfectly and step by step and know exactly what your plan is, when you release that control and allow the universe to present you the opportunity to bring your desires to you, you're basically opening yourself up to the possibility of something even better than what you had envisioned. Because like I mentioned earlier in the story, I had been looking for another job, which now, where I am now, is so much more aligned than working a junior graphic design position for another company. I'm so happy now that I didn't get that junior graphic designer position that I was so attached to. But now, a year later, I'm so grateful that I didn't get that job because I got something better. I got the opportunity to start my own business. I got the push that I really needed because one thing that I've realized is I think for me personally, the reason that this story manifested out of so much struggle and pain is because I was being kind of stubborn. When I was looking for a graphic design job, I knew that deep down in my heart, I did want to work for myself. I wanted to be my own boss, but I was being stubborn. I wanted to feel safe and secure and do what you're supposed to do and have a plan and be responsible. I wasn't following my intuition and I wasn't following my deep core desires, and I was trying to suppress what I actually really wanted. I had to basically manifest a push for myself, and even though it was painful, I am so grateful that I went through all of that because the result was something better. It was something better than I thought that I wanted. I've basically created my dream job for myself, and I've created this opportunity for myself. And I think that if you're in a position where you're in a struggling phase of your life where you feel kind of like you don't have any hope and there's no opportunity and you don't know what to do next, I really hope that this story helped to show you that sometimes the best transformations and the best opportunities are gonna come from completely unexpected places. And if you just open yourself to seeing those situations as opportunities for change and growth and transformation, you might get what you want or something even better. Okay, that is all I have for you today. I really, really hope that my long and winding story was of some value to you, whether as inspiration or as proof or as permission. Whatever it is that you need, I hope that it helped you in some way. Bye!